What if I told you that everything you think you know about genius is wrong? That the way society defines intelligence, success, and creativity is not just incomplete, but deeply flawed? What if I told you that Arthur Schopenhauer, a 19th century German philosopher often misunderstood and overlooked, had a radically different view of genius that could completely transform how you live, think, and pursue meaning? And what if this view isn't just intellectual, but something you can feel in your bones? Something that might finally explain why you've always felt different, disconnected, or even disillusioned in a world obsessed with productivity and results.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
We're going to go on a journey, a deep, raw, and personal one, into the mind of Schopenhauer. We're not just going to analyze his thoughts from a distance. We're going to live through them. We're going to challenge everything we've been told about success, talent, and purpose. And by the end of this journey, you might come to realize that you've had the spark of genius within you all along, but you were looking in the wrong direction. Schopenhauer didn't think genius was about IQ scores, or fame, or even accomplishments. In fact, he saw genius as something that had very little to do with the person themselves. For him, genius wasn't about what you create, but how you see. Let that sink in. Genius is not about doing, it's about perceiving. The genius is the one who sees the world differently, who sees past the veil of illusion that most people call reality. Most people, Schopenhauer believed, are trapped in what he called the will, a blind, striving force that drives all living things. It's the hunger, the desire, the constant wanting, the need to achieve, to possess, to win. Sound familiar? We live in a culture that worships the will. From the moment we wake up, we're told to hustle, to grind, to chase dreams, to build empires. But Schopenhauer saw this endless striving as a kind of suffering, because the will is never satisfied. You get one thing and you want the next. You win one award and you're already thinking about the next. The will is a treadmill with no off switch, and most people live their entire lives on that treadmill, never realizing they're running in place. But the genius steps off. The genius is the one who can stop, breathe, and see the world without wanting anything from it. The genius doesn't look at a flower and think, can I sell this? Or can I paint this and become famous? The genius simply sees the flower, its shape, its color, its existence, and this pure perception, this moment of non-wanting, is where true genius lives. Isn't that wild? Have you ever had a moment where you were so fully immersed in something, time disappeared? Maybe it was music, or a sunset, or a conversation that felt like it unlocked another dimension. That's the glimpse of what Schopenhauer called genius. Not because you were doing something impressive, but because you weren't wanting. You were seeing, feeling, being fully. And in that moment, you weren't a creature of the will. You were something more. But here's the twist. This kind of genius isn't popular. It's not rewarded. In fact, it often looks like failure in the eyes of the world. Schopenhauer himself was ignored most of his life. His lectures were empty. His books went unread for years. He was overshadowed by Hegel, who was far more fashionable at the time. But Schopenhauer didn't care. He didn't write to become famous. He wrote because he had to, because he saw something and he needed to express it. That's the mark of true genius. It flows from necessity, not ambition. Can you feel how different this is from what we're taught? We're told to chase success, to build personal brands, to market ourselves. But Schopenhauer would say, stop. Just stop. Look, listen, see the world without wanting anything from it. That's where the magic is. That's where life begins to reveal itself not as a battlefield, but as a painting, a poem, a mystery. But let's not sugarcoat it. This path is hard. And to live like a genius in Schopenhauer's sense is to walk a lonely road, because you'll no longer be chasing what others chase. You'll no longer find meaning in the things the world celebrates. You'll start to feel alien, detached, maybe even empty. That's the cost of waking up. But here's the secret. In that emptiness, something new is born. A deeper peace, a richer joy. Not the sugar high of achievement, but the deep exhale of simply being alive, aware, and open to the miracle of existence. Ask yourself this: when was the last time you truly saw the world without thinking about what you could get from it? When was the last time you looked at something or someone without wanting to control, possess, or change it? That's the genius moment. That's the shift. And it's terrifying because it requires you to let go of everything you thought mattered. Schopenhauer believed that art, music, and nature could help us get there. Because in those moments, when you're listening to a symphony, watching the ocean, or standing in front of a painting, you can forget yourself. You can forget your ego, your problems, your goals. You dissolve into the moment, and in that dissolution, genius awakens. You become a vessel, not a controller, a witness, not a warrior. But don't get it twisted. This isn't about giving up. It's about waking up. You still act, you still live, but you do it from a different place. You're no longer a slave to the will. You're not chasing happiness, you're creating space for it. You're not forcing life to make sense, you're allowing it to unfold. And maybe the most radical part of Schopenhauer's view, he believed that suffering is essential to genius. Not because suffering is noble, but because it breaks the spell of the will. When you suffer, when your dreams collapse, when life punches you in the gut, you're forced to step back, to question, to see. Pain opens the door to perception. It strips away illusion. It reminds you that you are not in control, and in that humility you begin to see the world as it truly is. So if you've ever felt like your pain made you more aware, more sensitive, more alive, you're not crazy. That's the genius waking up in you. Not the kind that builds empires, but the kind that sees clearly. And that kind of seeing, it changes everything. Your relationships, your work, your sense of self. You stop needing to be special. You just are. And that's enough. But here's the question. Are you brave enough to see like a genius? Are you willing to let go of the chase, the constant hunger, the ego games? Can you sit in silence and see what's really there, not what you want to see, but what is? That's the challenge. That's the invitation. And it's not easy, but it's worth it. We're going deeper. We're going to explore how this idea of genius plays out in everyday life, in love, in creativity, in failure. But first, I want you to sit with this. What would your life look like if you stopped striving and started seeing? What if true intelligence isn't about knowing more, but needing less? If you're still here, something inside you is stirring. Maybe it's a quiet voice that's always been there, whispering that there's more to life than this endless chase. Or maybe it's just the hunger for truth, for something real in a world full of noise. Either way, welcome back, because now we're going deeper, not just into Schopenhauer's mind, but into your own. What happens when you stop striving and start seeing? What happens when you realize your genius isn't about achievement, but awareness? Schopenhauer makes a profound claim: the genius is not the doer, but the knower. This flips everything on its head. In our world, we glorify the builders, the winners, the influencers. But Schopenhauer says no, the real genius is the one who sees through the illusion of doing. The genius doesn't conquer the world. The genius understands it, and not just intellectually, but viscerally, but deeply, with an empathy so vast it almost hurts. And here's where it gets personal. Because if genius is perception, then it means some of your most quiet, most overlooked moments might have been your most brilliant. Think about that time you watched someone cry, not with judgment, but with presence. Or when you stared at the stars and felt your own smallness. Or when you listened to music and felt emotions you couldn't explain. And those were genius moments. Not because you did something, but because you felt something without needing to label, fix, or own it. But genius, according to Schopenhauer, is also cursed. Why? Because to see clearly is to suffer more. When most people watch the news, they shrug. When the genius watches, they feel deeply. Because they see not just the facts, but the underlying pain, the failure of humanity to live in harmony. When most people walk through life half asleep, the genius is awake, and the world, in its rawness, often hurts. This is why Schopenhauer believed that many geniuses live in isolation or even depression, but they don't fit the mold. They don't care about what everyone else seems to care about. They're not motivated by status, money, or applause. They're motivated by truth. And truth is lonely. Have you ever felt that? That you see things others don't, and it isolates you rather than lifts you up? That's the burden of perception. And yet, it's also the gift. Because once you accept that you were never meant to fit in, everything changes. You stop apologizing for being sensitive. You stop hiding your depth. You stop numbing your awareness just to survive in a world that's addicted to distractions. You start honoring your genius, not as something to be praised, but as something to be protected. Because genius isn't loud, it's quiet, it's subtle, it's sacred. But what does this look like in real life? Let's talk about love. Most people love with the will, with desire. They want to possess, to control, to be fulfilled. But the genius loves differently. The genius sees the other not as a means to an end, but as a mystery to be witnessed. There's no agenda, no hunger, no grasping, just presence, just wonder, and that kind of love. It's rare. But when it happens, it's transformative. Or think about creativity. Most artists today are driven by the market, by likes, by followers. But Schopenhauer would ask, are you creating from the will or from perception? Are you making art to be seen, or because you saw something so beautiful, so tragic, so real that it had to be expressed? True genius doesn't care who's watching. It creates because it must. It's not a performance. It's a revelation. And failure, let's talk about that. Because Schopenhauer redefines failure in a way that's radical. If the world doesn't understand your vision, if you never become famous, if your work is ignored, does that make you a failure? Not in this philosophy. In fact, the more you detach from external validation, the more free you become. The genius doesn't need applause. The genius needs truth, and that truth often blooms in silence. Now, let's go a level deeper. Schopenhauer believed that the world we perceive is not the thing in itself, but a representation. In other words, what we see is shaped by our minds. Reality, as we know it, is filtered through our concepts, our language, our expectations. So when the genius sees more clearly, they're not seeing a different world, they're seeing through the veil. They're piercing the illusions that most people mistake for truth. And that requires something rare, the courage to be disillusioned. Because disillusionment is painful. It's the death of hope, of dreams, of comforting lies. But it's also the birth of wisdom. To be disillusioned is to finally see things as they are, not as you wish they were. And that's where real freedom begins. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom to stop being a slave to wanting. So here's the paradox. The more you transcend the will, the more you stop needing, the more alive you become. You start tasting the beauty of the world in ways you never could before. A single note of music can bring you to tears. A moment of silence feels like eternity. A simple gesture of kindness becomes a revelation. Because now, you're not trying to get anything out of life. You're receiving it, fully, without filter, without fear. But how do we live this way? How do we cultivate this genius of perception in a world that's constantly pulling us into distraction and desire? Start with stillness. Not the kind of stillness that's forced, but the kind that comes from letting go. Sit. Breathe. Observe. Don't try to meditate like a monk. You just be. Let your thoughts come and go. Watch them like clouds. And every now and then, you'll notice a gap, a space between thoughts. That space is where genius lives. Next, practice seeing. Look at things, really look. Not to judge, not to analyze, but to perceive. Watch people. Listen to them, not just their words, but their silences. Watch the way the light hits the floor. The way leaves move in the wind. Train yourself to see what others miss. It won't make you rich, but it will make you alive. And finally, embrace solitude. Not loneliness, solitude. The genius doesn't fear being alone because they're not empty inside. They're full of perception, full of wonder, full of questions. And here's one for you. If no one ever recognized your brilliance, would you still honor it? If your insights were never published, never liked, never shared, would they still be worth having? That's the test. Because the real genius isn't driven by outcome. They're driven by vision, by truth, by the unbearable beauty of existence itself. We often think genius is about standing out, but maybe it's about dissolving the ego, the need, the mask, until all that's left is consciousness, naked, raw, and radiant. That's what Schopenhauer saw. That's what he lived. And maybe that's why he suffered, but also why he saw more clearly than almost anyone. So now I ask you, what if your sensitivity is your strength? What if your oddness is your gift? What if your pain is your portal? What if your genius has less to do with what you produce and more to do with how you perceive? The world needs this kind of genius, quiet, watchful, awake, not to dominate, but to remind us that life is not a competition, but a miracle. And you, just as you are, might already be one of the rare few who can feel that miracle. Not because you're better, but because you're open. we're not done yet. In the next part, we'll explore the final transformation, the integration of Schopenhauer's genius into daily life, decision-making, relationships, and the path forward. But for now, sit with this. If you stopped wanting, who would you be? You're still here. That says something. It means you're not just interested in ideas, you're ready to live them, to embody them, to let them break you open and rebuild you from the inside out. And that's what this final part is about, integration. It's one thing to understand Schopenhauer's vision of genius. It's another to live it. To take that quiet, piercing perception and let it shape your choices, your relationships, your entire way of being. Because now we arrive at the real challenge. How do you carry this genius into a world that's obsessed with noise? How do you hold stillness in a culture that rewards motion? How do you honor perception in an economy that only values production? Let's begin with a truth that's both liberating and terrifying. You may never be understood. If you choose to live this way, if you choose perception over possession, awareness over ambition, you will confuse people. They'll ask why you're not chasing more, why you don't want what they want, why you're content with what looks like less. And you'll have to decide, do you explain, or do you simply live? Because the genius doesn't owe anyone an explanation. They don't need to justify their stillness, their depth, their refusal to play the game. They just live, quietly, fully, authentically. And in doing so, they become a mirror, reflecting back to others what they've forgotten, that life isn't about accumulation, but attention. Let's talk about decision-making. Most people make choices based on desire. What will get me ahead? What will make me look good? What will give me the upper hand? But the genius asks a different question. What is true? What is beautiful? What brings me closer to the real? It's not about outcomes, it's about alignment, integrity, depth. Imagine making decisions not from fear or hunger, but from clarity. Not from the will, but from perception. You'd say no more often, not out of rebellion, but out of reverence for your time, your energy, your soul. You'd let go of paths that looked impressive but felt empty. You'd follow the quiet pull toward what nourishes you, even if no one else understands why. This kind of living requires courage, not the loud kind. The quiet kind. The kind that whispers, stay true, when everything around you says, conform. The kind that walks away from applause because it knows the cost of approval can be your soul. The kind that chooses meaning over momentum. And what about relationships? Schopenhauer was famously pessimistic about human nature. He saw most relationships as contracts of mutual need, not genuine connection. But there's wisdom in that cynicism. Because when we relate from the will, we're always calculating. What can I get? How can I win? But when we relate from perception, something shifts. We see the other not as an object to satisfy us, but as a subject, a mystery, a universe of their own. This changes everything. You stop trying to fix people. You stop trying to be everything for them, or needing them to be everything for you. You hold space. You listen. You witness. And in that witnessing, something sacred emerges, real intimacy. They're not built on need, but on presence, not on fantasy, but on truth. But to love this way, to live this way, you have to let go of control. You have to let go of the fantasy that life will go as planned. Schopenhauer believed that suffering was not an interruption of life, It was the essence of life. And while that sounds bleak, it's actually a doorway. Because once you stop resisting suffering, you stop being defined by it. You start seeing it, understanding it, even honoring it. Suffering, for Schopenhauer, was the fire that burns away illusion. It wakes you up, it humbles you, it opens your eyes. And if you let it, it can make you more perceptive, more compassionate, more real. So the question isn't how to avoid suffering. The question is, what will you allow your suffering to reveal? Because that's where genius is forged, not in comfort, but in clarity. Not through success, but through surrender. The genius is the one who lets pain become perception, who lets loss become listening, who lets disappointment become depth. Can you do that? Can you sit with your own heartbreak, not to fix it, but to feel it? Can you allow your failures to teach you, not just about the world, but about yourself? Can you let go of the life you thought you were supposed to live, so you can finally see the life that's actually in front of you? This is what it means to integrate genius. It's not about being smarter, it's about being more aware, more attuned, more alive. It's about choosing to see the world not as a battlefield to dominate, but as a mystery to be gently explored. And here's the wild part. Once you start living this way, something strange happens. You begin to attract others who see too. Not many, but a few. The quiet ones, the misfits, the deep feelers. You recognize each other not through words, but through presence, through silence, through that subtle nod that says, "You see it too, don't you?" That's the hidden community of the genius. It's not a club. It's not a status. It's a frequency, a resonance, a shared commitment to truth, beauty, and perception in a world that's forgotten how to look. So what do you do now? You live differently. You take the insights and you let them shape your day. You wake up and instead of rushing into action, you pause. You look around. You see the light on the wall. You feel your breath. You remember that life is not a race. It's a revelation. You go to work, and instead of getting caught in the game, you stay rooted in presence. You do your tasks with care, but without clinging. You speak truthfully. You listen deeply. You let go of needing to be impressive, and you become real instead. You return home, and you give your attention to the people in front of you, not as roles, but as souls. You listen without interrupting. You look without judging. You love without needing. And in doing so, you create a space where others can start to see too. That's the quiet revolution of the genius. Not loud, not flashy, but unstoppable. Because once you see the world this way, you can't unsee it. And you wouldn't want to. So I'll leave you with this. Schopenhauer's definition of genius isn't something you achieve. It's something you remember. It's already in you, in the part of you that's always been watching, always been wondering, always been waiting for permission to stop striving and start seeing. So give yourself that permission. Not tomorrow, not someday, now.